14 years ago, flight 5191 leaving Lexington crashed right after it took off. And two of the 49 people who died on that flight uh, was a former player of mine and his bride of 12 hours. They were married the night before. Uh, John Hooker and Scarlett Parsley Hooker. Uh, it was just an incredibly tragic thing. Sharon and I we went to the reception, our wedding, and then the reception. And the last time I ever talked to John, he was a big guy. He gave me a big old bear hug and said, "Coach, I love you. When I get back from our honeymoon, I want to get together with you. I want to talk about my future." Um, so the next morning, it was Sunday morning, and Sharon and I getting ready to go to church. I'm listening to the radio, and I hear just vaguely, I'm not really listening, something about about a plane crash, and it didn't register with me that it was Lexington. And so we go into church, and then they start talking about it at church because the news got out. But I had no idea, if I knew anybody on that flight. I kind of thought I would know somebody because Lexington's a decent sized city, but it's one of those cities where you still know a lot of people. When you fly somewhere, you almost always see somebody you know on the flight. But we got back from church. Sharon and we sat down to eat, and the phone rang, and it was another former player, and he was in tears, and he said, "Coach, Hook and Scarlett were on that flight," and my heart dropped, and I said, "Jared, no, I'm sure they weren't on that flight. There are a lot of flights that go out of Lexington every day." And he said, "No, Coach, they were on the flight." And I was just stunned. I couldn't really think. I couldn't comprehend it. And right after I hung up the phone, and I got another call from another former player. And then it sort of began to settle in that this is real. And then, gosh, the media started calling. It was amazing. I mean, everybody from CNN to Fox News and I just couldn't take the calls right then. I just said, "Hey, I'll get back with you." So finally it really, really settled in when I talked to my oldest son, Austin. I called him and I said, "Austin," because they were teammates. They entered UK together as freshmen, uh, in summer baseball in the Valley League. They were roommates. They went four-wheeling together. They were just buddies. And so when I called Austin and he started crying on the other end of the phone, that's when I broke down. And it just really, it dawned on me, this is real. This really happened. So here's what I want to say about John Hooker. I barely knew Scarlett, but John Hooker was a guy who his best friend on our team, on the Kentucky team, was Brandon Webb, who most of you know. Brandon went on to become a Cy Young Award winner for the Diamondbacks. But John Hooker was the guy when we put those guys together in drills because John was a fireball. He had high energy, and Brandon was about as laid back as you could get. He, I mean, he was worn out if he just would breathe. He just was a slow moving guy, but he was very talented. But we knew Hooker would push Brandon Webb to be his best. So we weren't great coaches, but we were smart enough. We need to put Hooker with Webb so that Hooker can push Webb and get more out of him. So, John Hooker was one of those guys that if Brandon pitched great, he was more excited than if he had done it himself. If somebody hit a home run for our team, he was the first guy out of the dugout. He was just a great teammate, and he loved his teammates. He loved the Wildcats. He loved watching UK basketball. He grew up in London, Kentucky, and he was just an incredible fan. And we'd get on the bus, and he was always telling me, "Coach, Tubby should have done this. He should have done that." He was a typical Kentucky fan that knew everything about what was going on with the team. But these two verses in Philippians 2, 3, and 4 epitomize who John Hooker was. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Those two verses really do epitomize John Hooker. And it's easy to say good things about people when they pass. Almost everybody does that. But folks, I'm telling you, those two verses epitomize who John Hooker was. He always put others first. And just a big, lovable guy. As I said, he loved his family. He loved the Wildcats. He loved his teammates. He loved Scarlett. John Hooker loved well. And it's really interesting. And I know this is not an accident. The theme of what I was going to talk about today is how John Hooker loved well. And the last thing Dan Lewis prayed in his prayer, and we had not talked about this, is to help us love well. Those kinds of things are not an accident. That's God sending us a message and using someone as flawed as me. And I'm not going to say that about Dan because he's a lot better dude than I am, but he uses us no matter who we are. He chooses to use us to send a message. And I'm tremendously humbled by that. But John Hooker loved well. I hope that we can all have that said about us when our lives are over. That Rich Sparks loved well. That Peyton Sparks loved well. That Dan Lewis loved well. Rusty Strapp loved well. John Piper loved well. John Wong loved well. Taylor Valentine loved well. Marty Lamb loved well. Jamie Cervantes loved well. And Ed Ray loved well. And Keith Madison loved well. We can all do that. That's within our grasp. We can love well. And I'm going to close this part out by reading a few verses from 1 John. And if you have a Bible handy, it might be good for you to read along, but if not, you can just listen, open your heart to this. This is John writing, of course. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. Just a phenomenally beautiful passage about the love of God and how he wants us, as flawed as we may be, he wants us to exude that love. John Hooker wasn't perfect, but he loved well. And there's another passage in the Bible that says, love covers a multitude of sin. Thank God for that. Thank God for that. So, thank you so much for letting me share that. And, we're told that where two or more are gathered together, he is with us. And I really believe he's with us today. So I have two questions that I want to ask, and, I may call you out. I may call on somebody to answer these questions, but here's one. What are some of the things that we can do to leave a legacy of one who loved well?